The new look Nets take the court for the first time as a whole team post Kevin Durant, post Kyrie Irving, and we nearly got some real drama with a buzzer beater that nearly fell from Spencer Dinwiddie. Going to take a look at what we saw from this team in Brooklyn for the first time as a whole group, the defense, which could be special, the offense, which might need some work, and what to look forward to coming forward in these days in Brooklyn. We're going to get all into that next, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the new look Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, the owner-operator of DFSR.com. If you need some fantasy projections for DraftKings, FanDuel, want some bets for those sites as well, go check out DFSR.com. Got you covered there. No Adam Armbrecht today. That's all right. My man put in an absolute effort around the trade deadline. If you were hanging around the Locked On Nets streets, you know that Adam, I don't think, slept for about 72 hours before the trade deadline, after the trade deadline. So he is taking a much needed, much deserved break. We are here following the first Nets game with the entire new look group. Post Kyrie Irving trade, post Kevin Durant trade, the new era in Brooklyn is coming down the pike. And this was our first chance to see what things were going to look like, see how the rotations were going to kind of play out, see who was going to get playing time and who wasn't, something that maybe wasn't completely obvious before, this group came in, although we could make some reasonable assumptions. Got some first looks at some of those things and how the team was going to gel in a game against the Sixers here in a tough matchup, though it was at home against a full strength Sixers team who, even without Kevin Durant, even without Kyrie Irving, clearly want to take home a win here. And you got a really energetic performance. There's a lot of things that we're going to take away from this game. A lot to like about what the Nets are kind of putting forth here. Some things that are going to probably still and continue to be a struggle going forward in the rest of the season as they look to reshape who they are as a team, who they are as an organization. I mean, this is a major ground shift in how Brooklyn has done business. We've been 3 years in the superstar era, or maybe 3.5 years really in the superstar era with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and with a brief stopover of James Harden. And now the team has basically reset itself into something like we saw pre that era, which is, sort of plucky upstart role players, maybe trying to take a leap into a new part of their career, guys who were, maybe didn't have full opportunities elsewhere, players that we just want to sort of see what they are going forward. And obviously the culture and just everything else in Brooklyn is completely different. And sometimes, even though it didn't seem like this was going to be the case, life comes at you really, really fast with teams like this. Like one day you are sort of sitting near the top of the championship odds, waiting for Kevin Durant to come back, waiting for the pieces to kind of get back in place for the team. And the next minute you are sort of maybe a up and coming team with things that you want to build on and, players that are going to develop. And that's just kind of how the NBA goes sometimes. I don't think we thought it was going to be with the Brooklyn Nets. Definitely like at the end of December, it didn't seem like this was going to be the case, but all of a sudden we just have a totally new shift. And I have to tell you, I'm totally here for it. Like I was unclear about how I was going to feel about Kevin Durant not being here, Kyrie Irving not being here, because it was going to change the feeling and the trajectory of the team overall. And I think what we've seen from these first two games, the win on Thursday night, and then the win, even the loss here to Philly in a 101-98 loss, is I think what's become very clear is that, one, the Nets are still going to be a very fun team. I think that much in just the two games, and this is only the first one with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, and seeing how things were going to shake out there. I think we can understand that this is still going to be a fun team. The expectations have been reset. we're still going to kind of hang on every win and loss. It might not feel the exact same. We're still going to argue about minutes. We're going to argue about who should be playing where. We're going to argue about what Jacques Vaughn should or shouldn't have done, who should be getting more run, what they do well, what they don't do well. That's basketball. We're always going to be kind of discussing that stuff, kind of no matter who is on the team. But I think what we've seen from this early look at this team is like, you know what? This Brooklyn team, even in a loss tonight against the Sixers, I think we're going to have a lot of fun watching this team. I think we're going to have a lot of fun discussing this team, seeing what we have in guys like Bridges, Mikal Bridges, seeing what we have in Cam Johnson, what's going to happen with Cam Thomas, what's going to happen with Ben Simmons going forward, where Dorian Finney-Smith fits in, how we can still see Claxton maybe ascend to just a different level. Those things are all still very much on the table. And that's what we're going to get with the Brooklyn Nets. Are there superstars in this team? No. Are there a couple guys who could end up being superstars? I think we're going to see over the course of this season and maybe next season that, yeah, there might be guys on this squad that are prepared to take a leap, that are going to be in brand new roles, that are going to be in situations totally different than what they were coming from previously. And there's a chance that we see what sort of happened with the Nets before, which was guys came from situations that maybe weren't the most advantageous for them. And now all of a sudden, they're in situations where they can really shine. And I think that sort of, for me, is what the theme is. Was I cheering very hard for this game to pull out a W against a full strength Sixers team? Dude, of course. Like, I'm cheering for these games like these are freaking playoff games. The first two games after this, like Thursday's game against the Bulls, this one against the Sixers, this is about as hard as I've cheered for the Nets in seasons. And maybe I'm just like front running a little on the more recency bias around my emotions around a team. But I feel very committed to the idea of, yeah, it's a new look. Yeah, expectations are different. Yeah, this is not the championship level squad that we saw before, but there's plenty to get excited about. You can get really, really excited for the defense here. Talked about this before the game, and Adam and I talked about how this might look. But this Nets team defensively is going to be an absolute problem for teams. You could see it in the game against the Bulls before they even had Bridges and Cameron Johnson on the court. And you could really see it in this Sixers game. This team is so long. This team is very switchable on defense. This team gets into your pocket. This team can create chaos. This team gives you no room to operate. If you were a guy like James Harden that wants to get into switches, that first group, there's nowhere to go. And there is nowhere to operate. And I think that if you are into defensive basketball and you like to see a team completely bought in on one end of the court and really bought in on both ends of the court, but definitively bought in on the defensive end where they have made it their mission to make it extremely difficult for you, then you are going to absolutely love this Nets squad. They are a team of wings right now with extreme length that are coming from cultures where they were their team's best defender. And now they have multiple guys like this that are just used to picking up the hardest assignments, that are used to just the biggest challenges, that want to step up into those roles and make it very difficult for the other team's superstars, knowing that their name, the guys on the Nets, aren't as big as the Hardens and Embiids of the world, and have sort of already made their bones in the NBA on the idea that they are going to make things very, very difficult for you from a basketball perspective and a fan perspective, especially for a team that's maybe now kind of up and coming and plucky rather than superstar laden and on a championship trajectory. Yeah, man, this is going to be super fun. Are some of the games going to be rock fights like we've seen in the first two? Of course. The offense is going to be a struggle. Going to talk about that in a second. But from a defensive standpoint and what this team can do and bring it, if you're into teams that are bought in and want to play a brand of basketball that maybe like not every team in the NBA really prides themselves on, I think the Nets are really, really going to stand out in that respect. This was a tough game against the Sixers. Every team is going to have matchup problems against a team like Philly with Harden, but especially Embiid. The Nets held this team to 101 points. Now they scored 98, so they lost. Although that Dinwiddie piece, man, that was close. It was definitely the right call. It took, half a second too long for him to get it off, or else they're headed to OT. But they look every bit up for the challenge with everybody bought in. And I love this. I can already tell this little era from a basketball and fan perspective. I think some folks out there, and I can see over there on YouTube, some people have been waiting for this, like waiting kind of years for this. And that's not to say that we didn't want to have a championship here in Brooklyn and it wasn't great to have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It was, believe me, Like, you want those guys more often than not. But if you can be in a situation where it wasn't tenable to have that anymore, the next best thing you want is a group of guys who look like they really care, who are trying to punch above their weight and are trying to really kind of become something a little bit better in basketball. And I think that's what we have with the Brooklyn Nets right now. Want to get into some of the stuff that we did see on offense, some of the stuff that we did see on defense. I think there's a lot to break down. I want to talk about who actually played a lot of minutes in this game and who didn't, because I think that's going to be an interesting sort of story that we're going to want to talk about going forward. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to that, and we're going to get into that next. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. Look, finding people for the job that if you're a small business owner or hiring manager, trying to find the people for those jobs that are open in your company in 2023 is what success is all about. You have to find the right team members. You have to surround yourself with the right people. And it can be hard because that player pool, like we even know in basketball, can be big and wide and can sometimes be hard to narrow down. That is why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experience to achieve those goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools that go beyond the resume data by using insights from your job post. They use those 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect to them fast and for free. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, taking a look at some of the stuff that was going on in this game. I talked a little bit about the defense. Want to break that down a little bit more about what you're seeing. Then we'll get into the offense because we want to start with some of the good things first. Look, this is still a loss. I think that it's disappointing, especially when you can get this close against a very good team. You're at home. I was a little surprised by the line +1 for the Nets. Some of that I think was born on the idea that like Embiid was questionable going into the game, but yeah, still maybe some respect for what this Nets team can be and what they can kind of ultimately be going forward. Defensively, I said it before, this team is a problem. When you have a guy like James Harden who wants to get into every switch and get into just kind of finding your weakest spot and taking you down through the shot clock and sort of positioning the team in a way that's going to have him in a really advantageous spot, then they can either get him to the basket or can just get Embiid into the switch that they want, maybe get a seal off in the restricted area, something like that, or just get Embiid into the high post where he's going to be able to just turn around and just make jumpers over and over again. I think what the Sixers saw really early was like this Nets squad with the starters that they threw out there, Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Nic Claxton, there's nowhere to go. Like, you were not getting any switch in that with that group specifically that got you anywhere. And so it became really difficult for the Sixers offense to operate because a team that wants to kind of take their time and methodically sort of just move the chess pieces around the board in order to like find the best spot, what they would find was they would begin moving the chess pieces around only to find that it was kind of just like a stalemate because there was nowhere to go. So you'd see Harden get Cam Johnson, say, switched onto him. Cam Johnson picked his pocket at least once, got him down to end the shot clock, sort of like heave shots. Embiid, was still a problem on the inside, but they really made his life difficult overall. The line doesn't really like sort of reflect that because Embiid obviously put in 37 and 13. I'll still contend that these are around the lines that he's putting up against the NBA in general this season. So it's not like, I know 37 points doesn't look like he stopped anybody, and he didn't, but believe me, watching the game, their lives were made very, very difficult with this. And this team is so switchable, so long. You saw it on so many possessions where they would start an action and it was like, whoops, nowhere to go there. Like, I'm going to take this lane. Oh, that's closed off. Oh, there's arms flying everywhere here. And even without a great amount of girth or size, like games like this, like honestly, we're going to see this more and more. If a team does not have like a superior post player and they're kind of wing heavy or guard heavy, this Nets team is going to just shut them down. Like, it is going to be so difficult for them to score. If they're going to switch everything 1-5, which they're going to do with this group, wait till they play opponents that don't have like generational talents on the block, or like sort of generational talents of ball creation and just overall offensive creation, and a guy like Harden. It's going to be so difficult. And we kind of saw this coming. Talked about this even before this group got together, was to say, oh, you're adding the best wing defender in Mikal Bridges from his team, one of the best wing defenders in all of basketball. You're adding Dorian Finney-Smith, the best defender from his team, who already said in his pre-Nets conference that said, my job is to take the best assignment. You get Cam Johnson, who's we've already seen an excellent switch defender. We already know that Claxton has this in his game. And if you have 4 guys in your starting lineup that pride themselves on the defensive end, and I was watching with a friend of mine tonight, and he shout out James Davis. He pointed out something really cool, which I hadn't really thought about, but it's actually I think we're going to see this play out, is that these guys are coming from teams where they actually had sort of weak links on defense because the superstars on their teams just weren't called to do that stuff. And it was kind of on them to cover up those mistakes, right? Which is fine. That's how basketball is made. No one would ever, you'll always take a Luka Doncic on your team, right? You'll always take Devin Booker or Chris Paul on your team. But those guys have come from a culture where it was on them to sort of cover up and make good on the mistakes, or make good on maybe the lack of defense from some of the other better players. Well, now all of a sudden they're coming to a team where not only do they not have to do that, but they have other guys in the team that are also used to doing that. And now all of a sudden you have an absolute stonewall on defense among that group. And I think that's going to be a brand of basketball, just to reiterate from the beginning, that this Nets team is going to build themselves and pride themselves on. The team already looks super cohesive. The team already looks like they're having fun playing with each other. This is a group of sort of role players and somewhat journeymen to some degree. And I think they all kind of understand that, and all understand that they kind of got traded for superstars, and their team saw them as pieces that could be moved off of in order to get better. They all understand it. They talked about it. Mikal Bridges talked about it. But they're still going to bring this piece of the game that they've already developed in their other stops, and they're going to bring that to this Nets team. And I think that's a really, really exciting thing. Now, offensively, it's going to be something of a struggle. Okay. Like, we've saw already some version of this with this group tonight, where offensively it got really, really bogged down. Okay. They scored 16 points in the fourth quarter. They went 4 minutes at one point without scoring. It really was such a struggle. Now, Philly is a very good defensive team with one of the best interior defenders in all of basketball, right? This is Philly right now, top 6 in defensive efficiency. Probably will have improved a little bit after this game. So this is already like a top tier defense. Because they're a team full of kind of long defenders, that is, and not exactly phenomenal two-way players, in that no one's really been the offensive engine for a team before. The closest they probably have is Dinwiddie, and you can probably imagine what your ceiling is with him as all of your offensive creation. But we did see some problems here on offense. I wouldn't call it stagnation, although maybe that is the best word for it, where it was just taking them too long to get into sets. They were working themselves into really, really disadvantaged situations, specifically with Dinwiddie. Just to call out like one specific problem that they had in this game, was that Dinwiddie was really pretty slow in getting the offense going. And then because Philly was switching the Claxton pick and roll with him, and if you're watching this game, you saw this happen. How many times did you see Joel Embiid as the primary defender on Dinwiddie, and he just had nowhere to go? Like, it was just completely closed down from the absolute beginning. And this just happened too many times. Now, in the second to last possession, where he actually blew by him and got the dunk, was about the only time anything good came from those possessions. It was just too much of Embiid on Dinwiddie. Clearly the Sixers were fine switching that PNR stuff over and over again. And because they just like put the smaller guy in Claxton, let the rim roll go, and knew that Dinwiddie was just never going to fully take advantage of the situation. And that really, really stagnated their offense. Outside of him, they don't have a ton of on-ball creation with that group. With the Bridges and Cam Johnson group, we saw a lot of three-pointers from these guys. I think we're going to continue to see that as part of their overall offensive makeup. But I do expect that even the gains that they got on the defensive end, there's going to be a lot given back on the offensive end. And we saw that. And this won't be the only time. When the threes aren't completely dropping and they go a little cold from that area, this is the kind of offense that they're going to get. That's just the way this team is sort of built at this point. They're built on 3-and-D. There's a reason a lot of these guys get the 3-and-D moniker for themselves, is because that's primarily what their game is 3-pointers and a lot of defense. It's not 3D and then dribble around and create your own mid-range shot guys. Like, there's a reason these guys haven't got that label. I do think we'll see an offensive expansion from a guy like Mikal Bridges, who clearly was starting to make that leap this season with the Suns in the time without Booker. And we saw some of that tonight. He took 18 shots, went 8 for 18 with only 5 3-pointers. And I think we're going to see his game expand to the point where we might be at a point late, a year from now, where we're talking about Bridges as a totally different player than what he'd been talked about with Phoenix. He was sort of on this trajectory already. But the rest of these guys, I do think it's going to be kind of a struggle. And I think we saw, at least from these early rotations from Jacques Vaughn, which are always open to change, and we've seen these things change many times over the years, we are in a situation where this situation might not change too much. This might be what we're getting from their offense and just from their team in general. When it comes to the offensive creation, with a lot of late shot clock stuff from Dinwiddie, or just a lot of just sort of poor offensive matchups from them in general. So there's always going to be a give and take with these situations. There's always going to be, like, you're not going to get everything. They didn't put together. There's a reason superstars are the superstars. There's a reason Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant, right? Like, he's absolutely like an all-timer on offense and excellent on defense, right? Like, those guys, they want to consolidate power in the NBA around those dudes, and the Nets don't have those guys anymore. Like, that's not what the team is made up of. It is a team that's going to go 12 deep, possibly on some nights, and a team that offense, hey, some nights could be a struggle, and maybe they're going to make some adjustments to what can happen with the squad to maybe unlock a bit when it comes to the offensive piece as well. Want to talk about sort of who ended up playing this game, what the rotations ended up being. There's a kind of a ton to look at just like early on about what we might be seeing from this squad going forward in terms of who's going to play. And there's a lot to break down, which we're going to do next. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. We're at the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers on FanDuel get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel wants to sign you up so you can get those bonus bets. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's super safe, secure, and very easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores. You can go into threes, assists. You get all these points, obviously, all these player props that they have on there as well. Right now in FanDuel, it's still up there, folks. I think we were probably part of what trumpeted this to be the case. We pleaded it into existence. Nic Claxton is right now tied second overall on FanDuel with plus 700 for Defensive Player of the Year. I feel like if we just keep trumpeting this idea, we can push him even further. Get Jaren Jackson Jr. at minus 200 out of there, folks. Get Nic Claxton up those rankings. FanDuel has you covered. Every kind of bet that you can imagine. They can let you combine bets together for a chance at a bigger payout with those are the same game parlays. Don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we're going to close out the podcast form of this one, and then we're going to move into YouTube bonus stuff. As a reminder, if you are listening on the podcast feed, you got to get over to YouTube. Doing YouTube live coming right after the game. Got tons of people in here. If you have questions on YouTube, make sure you throw at Locked On Nets. We'll try to answer some of those and get the discussion going afterwards. If you're on the podcast, make sure you are subscribed over at YouTube, the Locked On Nets YouTube. Good to go over there. All right. Talked about what the starting lineup was here. Obviously, Dinwiddie, Bridges, Cam Johnson, DFS, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Nic Claxton. That's pretty much what we guessed it would be. There was one piece that I wasn't sure about going into the game where I thought there was a world where they would start Cam Thomas instead of Cam Johnson. I don't know if that's a situation that we see kind of fluid moving forward, where those pieces are interchangeable. They're going for length, obviously. They're going to go with Cam Johnson. Length and defensive prowess are going to go with Cam Johnson. If they need more scoring, I think it's going to be Cam Thomas. But I think what's interesting here is sort of like what the rotations were off the bench. So, okay, a couple things. One, Royce O'Neal, who basically started every single game when he was healthy and played, I think, the most minutes on the Nets this season. Look that up as we talk. These guys are already relegated to the bench, which is, interesting to kind of have happen in a ground shifting time. I'm not saying it's wrong. I do think this was the correct starting lineup. I think that Royce O'Neal had played basically as good as, Nets fans could have hoped to have play this year. Him moving to the bench so he was at 1773 in terms of minutes. Next closest was Claxton at 1515 going into this game. So I'm not really surprised by that, but it is an interesting move to kind of have this guy who kind of fits what they're doing, 3-and-D wing, but now he's just kind of not as good as the other guys that they've brought into this situation. So I'm not surprised. Little surprise is that I am kind of perking my ears up at, and that's not what you do. I'm kind of going to focus on and just kind of pay attention to. One, Cam Thomas comes in off the bench, plays 18 minutes, gets up to 12 shots, was basically his brand of basketball, except he wasn't getting fouls. So he ends up with 14 points, doesn't get to the line at all in his 18 minutes. Look, we saw kind of peak Cam Thomas or peak any NBA player when he was just dropping 40 bombs like they were the easiest thing in the world. I know it's clear that he was going to see a reduction in minutes and a reduction in usage just with the guys they had brought in. I did think that 18 minutes was a little low. And I do wonder, especially in that fourth quarter where the scoring was incredibly difficult, if we maybe should have seen a little more of him to just try to get some offense going where they just couldn't get anything going. Maybe we see a world where those minutes are expanded going forward. I'm not really sure. I do think they are going to need his scoring probably more than we thought just because of the way the team is constructed. And I think this fourth quarter really did highlight that. It's going to be interesting to see where that goes. I kind of get it because you give away some on defense when you're switching with him, and especially with him and Dinwiddie together. I'm not sure how that fit can be totally long-term. And 18 minutes when you struggle on offense is probably not enough for Cam. So I'm not sure where that goes going forward, but I was a little surprised that the number was that low, right? The second guy that we have to really tune into here, though, is Ben Simmons. Simmons comes off the bench, plays 16 total minutes. And I don't know if we're on like a path to Simmons becoming an afterthought here, or if this is just like injury management or what's going on. But this is one that we're going to keep an eye on. He played 20 minutes against Chicago, 16 minutes here against Philly. And I don't know, where are we going here? What's the path for Simmons here? Because here's the thing. Defensively, which is where they really needed him in the past, this point of attack defense, switching, all that other stuff, they don't kind of need that anymore with some of the guys that they had. And the stuff that he wasn't doing very well, which is creating a lot of offense and getting guys into great situations, they don't necessarily need to add that because they're already sort of deficient in that area. When he's playing with Kyrie and KD, the offensive stuff gets masked a little bit because he can just kind of DHO his way into sort of offensive creation or just kind of take a back seat because those guys can cook. The Nets don't have a situation where they can just allow him to take a back seat now because they already might not have enough offense. So we're in a weird situation with Simmons here where he might not be so much better defensively that you can play him and get by on that. And he might not be able to do enough on offense to really help the team. And I do wonder going forward, especially if the contract situation isn't played into his playing time, could we see a situation where he becomes increasingly out of the rotation? I don't know. This is a really weird spot with Simmons, I think. I think that, and get what I'm saying here. I'm actually not taking a dig at him really. I get that he's still a pretty high level defender. I'm just saying the other guys that they have now are also good defenders and kind of in some ways want to create more offense than he does. And so at that point, what are you really getting with him? And it might be a really, really weird spot with him. So this is something we're going to keep an eye on going forward. We'll see where we land with him. I'm a little concerned though that it could become a trend, but look, it's one game. It's Philly. Who knows? Like he can get out there 25, 26 minutes next time, and maybe we change our opinion of it. And I do think we'll see a lot of mixing and matching. I think that this was kind of a situation where, hey, these guys are new. Let's get them a lot of run. Let's get them becoming part of the team. Let's get them bought in. I think there's a lot of narrative pieces around this that you can talk yourself into when it comes to the new guys. But man, I don't know. I think there's real concerns, even just from a basketball perspective, of where Simmons completely fits in. And we'll see where that goes going forward. Joe Harris continues to shoot the absolute lights out of the ball. He shot 65% from three over the last 5 games. He did it again tonight, 6 for 9, scored 18 points. He's a continued problem on defense, and this is going to be the story. If the other team has a guard that understands anything about pick and roll and switching, then Harris gets the green light put over his head and just becomes the team that everyone picks on. If you watch the times when he was in the game, minutes where they overlapped with Harden got him into a switch every single time down the court, every time. And sometimes they would wait for it to kind of unfold. A few times they tried to hide Joe in the corner on the corner shooter. Corner shooter just came up for the screen. Like Shake Milton came up, even like sort of near the end of the shot clock, just because they all knew that they were trying to get Harris into that switch. And look, if you can trade 3-pointers on the other end, like Harris did tonight, it's not going to totally kill you, but it's such a problem with him on defense at this point. And most teams understand it, that I wonder if like he kind of struggles to stay in the lineup too, because the defense is really, really a problem. And again, he shot the lights out from 3. It's what's been able to keep him on the court. But the defense, man, like if you're in a switch everything style of defense, and they're going to just continue to switch his man every time, he's just going to get cooked. He got cooked against the Bulls. He got cooked here against Harden. And it's just a real problem. So we'll see how some of this shakes out. I think this is where we are with the Nets. We still have a lot of questions that we're going to have to answer with this team. I think it's going to be fun to find out. I think it's going to be fun to see how it all plays out. I think we'll see these minutes mix around and match around as the course of the season goes. I think they'll try to find the lineups that work. Maybe sometimes they'll play the hot hands. I think there's a lot of different sort of versions of this on a team that now all of a sudden can kind of go 12 deep. No one is a great player in the NBA, but they have a lot of very good above average players on this team. And sometimes when you're built for the regular season, which they kind of are now, we could probably see a lot of mixing and matching when it comes to that. So overall, a loss to the Sixers. Would have liked to see at least go to overtime or a W, because they kind of came that close in the end. In the end, I still think we're evaluating this team, seeing how they're going to go. And like I said from the beginning, the energy, at least in Nets fandom, I can see it. Like I was worried there was going to be a drop off here when Durant and Kyrie left the team. And if anything, I've seen a certain segment of fan, me included, that's really just almost been rejuvenated by what we're seeing on the court now. And that's really cool. So we are going to roll on with YouTube. If you have a question in YouTube, make sure you hit Locked On Nets. Try to throw a couple of those up there. For those on the podcast, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets. Make sure you visit our sponsors, FanDuel and LinkedIn as well. Adam is the one that always comes with the quotes in these things. He's the master of finding all the great American poets out there. I always get to this part of the podcast knowing that I've forgotten to do the one job, which is to curate a great quote that will close out the episode in perfect fashion. That's Adam Arbrecht's job. Adam Arbrecht, one of the great American poets. We'll be back again tomorrow and next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. All right. Live in YouTube. Got to get a drink of water here after going 30 straight minutes. Oh, we got Adam Arbrecht jumping in.
Oh, baby. Don't mess around. How's this going in here? Everybody good? Everyone feeling good?
It's good. Are you getting feedback from me? You're going to get a little
no way.
I don't have my headphones in now. So
that's right. This is the old risk reward. No, I think we're okay. I think you survived it.
All right. Didn't expect to see you here, buddy. How we do on the 30-minute solo? I feel like I absolutely crushed it, but
yeah, it was absolute perfection in a lot of ways, almost too good. Got me a little bit nervous. I listened to, I'm sure, flying in out of nowhere. I was listening to this driving home though, and the closing shot, just in case anyone wants to know what my experience was, that 3-point shot from Spencer Dinwiddie, you got Chris Carino on the radio broadcast. So they're like, boom, and Dinwiddie ties it up. We're going to overtime. We'll be right back. So it goes to radio commercial. Yeah. And then when it comes back in, it's like there's no buzz or energy. Go. And so after a little bit of review, but the funny thing was I watched it when I got home, and you could tell in real time. Like real time watching on TV, you knew that wasn't going to count. If you don't have the visual, friends, you thought Spencer Dinwiddie had really done something, and we were going to get an extra 5 minutes of basketball.
I was watching in a group. I was watching, like, we're just like, with friends. And I was, of course, like a hero, ignoring what was going on in the conversation and only watching the Nets game and tweeting into oblivion about it. I did a full on cheer when Dinwiddie hit the shot, but then I kind of knew right away that it looked like it was probably a step too late. Excuse me. Bring a couple of these questions up here. Let's see here. Okay, so he started the correct 5. I can answer this question. So it started the correct 5. Where do you think he made mistakes? I think he made one mistake. I kind of said at the end of the podcast when it was very clear that the offense had really bogged down in the fourth quarter. They really probably needed to make a change and exchange some of the defense for offense, because it was just kind of obvious where the game was going in terms of they just couldn't get buckets. And it wasn't like if anything, Philly kind of missed some ones they should have made, and the Nets just couldn't score at all. And everything was hard. I mean, getting to the rim. And look, Embiid's like an awesome defender. It's really going to be very difficult to score against them in general, especially if you're trying to get to the rim. The threes weren't falling. I probably would have tried to get Cam Thomas in there just for some buckets, knowing that you're going to have to live with some of the downside. I think I would have gone that direction. That's really the only change I would have made, though. Like, I think in general, this team, again, I couldn't have said this more on the podcast. They're so freaking good at defense now that, like, it's going to be a real problem. Like, wait till they play the Knicks. Like, they match up really well against this Knicks team. Like, that Knicks team that wants to, like, sort of like ISO Randall at times and let kind of get Jalen Brunson into the mid-range into the short game. Like, that's gonna be really hard for them. Like, I just think most teams are gonna really struggle on the offensive end against this Net squad. I said it before on Twitter. I said it on the podcast. These guys get ready for rock fights. Every game is gonna be like 100. Is gonna be like 101 to 99 or 105 to 104. Like, that's just where they're gonna be. They're gonna lose some if the threes don't go down, but like, they're just not going to give up a lot of points. They're going to play really slow, and they're going to make your life hell for you on defense. So I don't know if I would have made tons of changes here. I did think it was smart to get the new guys a lot of playing time, though, like, and just have them be like, hey, you're part of the team now. So, like, I think that, like, that was smart. I probably would have put a little more Cam Thomas in there, though.
Yeah, it's funny. I heard Jacques Vaughn talked after the game. They were asking him about it, and he said, like, specifically when it comes to rotations and some of the other guys, I know you were talking about Royce O'Neal, but he was saying, like, he referenced, like, mental toughness of, can I go to Yuta Watanabe for just like 5 minutes in a game like this and have it be an effective 5 minutes? Can I go to Dayron for 3 to 5 minutes? Only ends up being 3 in this game. Can I go for a very small sample size and get effective, impactful play? So he kind of referenced saying, like, I'm testing how effective guys can be when they understand going into the game. There's only going to be a couple of really small opportunities for you. Can you maximize what you get there? And then probably play off of that. But to your point too, like, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, it's your first games. Like, I think you want all the first guys to kind of be there and then look at the rest of the roster and say, trust that we're going to come back around and figure this out. But you even mentioned it about Royce O'Neal as well. There's a guy that does what you do better. So that's what I mean about
O'Neal, all these guys.
Yep.
Royce O'Neal, Ben Simmons to some degree. Like, these guys just do some of the things you do well, as good as you do it or better. And they're better on the other end too. So like, they're just better players. Like, they just brought in better versions. They drastically reduced the top end talent, but they dramatically increased the middle of their talent. Right. Like, up. And actually, I'm going to throw up a question here because I think this actually fits 2 back-to-back and then some of their questions.
This is your show, buddy.
Of course it is. Excuse me. I just burped. So so Brad Parkinson asked this, and then Charlie asked this back-to-back questions about Sumner, which I didn't expect to see. But I think, so one of the feelings I had about this team, and I tweeted about this before the game, was we're going to see a real minutes crunch for some of these guys, because finding 240 minutes for this current team is actually kind of tough. Like, this team is so deep now that this actually played out even a little differently than I thought it was going to, where the starters played kind of like tons of minutes in this game. Bridges played 34, DFS played 34, Dinwiddie played 31. Actually, he's not, I guess not tons, but the thing is, the middle of the rotation, like the players 6 through 11 on this team are good. And if you're not on 6 through 11, there's just no time. You run out of time. Like, there's no more minutes in the game.
This is what I had asked about. I'd said, finding a way to break down these 240 minutes is going to be a real problem in a great way, because you have so many options.
Mm-hmm.
And someone had responded back with, well, you start with Bridges and, you named a couple of guys. He goes, then you go from there. But I think, to your point, like, this box score kind of lays it out. Like, okay, Finney-Smith, could you see a world where you bring down a few minutes and you insert a little more offense or, a certain type of player? Great. But other than that, like 35, for Bridges makes sense. 30 minutes, Claxton, Dinwiddie, like it all lines up. And to your point, like, you go into the back end, like, more Cam Thomas, sure. But I feel like you're trying to, it's funny with Ben Simmons, I think you're trying to see if you can coax him into the thing where, because there's a nice ball handler, like there's your facilitator, your table setter, but you need some level of consistency on the offensive end that you can rely on. But it's not going to be hard to, like, run into this exact problem on a night in, night out basis. Maybe you look at Patty and you got 7 minutes to spare.
Well, that one made no sense. I said that in the time. I was like, what is he doing in this game? Like, I don't understand this one at all. And that one, I should have said that I should have added that to my mistakes. Like, his 7 minutes should have just been like 7 more Cam Thomas minutes, or literally 7 minutes of anybody else.
Anywhere else.
It made no sense at the time. So that's not even a retroactive. He could have hit 3 3-pointers in a row and I would have had the same reaction. Like, he had absolutely no business getting into the game.
And here's what I think will be interesting about this, to the Edmund Sumner piece of it. It is the Royce O'Neal. It kind of does go to the Royce O'Neal part. Like, Royce O'Neal now becoming redundant in what his skill set is. I wonder if over time, if you're thinking about the backcourt and stuff you want to do, Royce O'Neal 17 minutes might end up being kind of on the high side in a lot of games, depending on how these other players are, how effective they are. But it feels like a game to game and a rhythm thing. I just don't know if we'll see Jacque Vaughn make in-game real significant shifts in who's being utilized until he, like, gives some run to the 4 new players you have with the compliments they have now.
I was thinking this myself, going into this game, and just kind of into after all these moves, and especially seeing how it all played out here too. The part where this question, so Wesley says, could you see a super, or it's not a question, he just says it. I could see a superstar looking at this team and saying, yeah, all they're missing is me. I agree with this. I think the two things are setting up to happen here is, one is, and I said this before, is like, these guys, for the most part, were all role players on their teams before, right? They were all guys who were
playing off
either like the primary defenders of the team or like secondary ball handlers or whatever. Like, they were all kind of like not even Robins, like they were like Alfreds or something. Like they just like they weren't even out there like at the point of attack, like fighting everything, but they all really had all bought into that role, which was like 3-and-D, just like lockdown defenders. I think they're going to build on the idea that they just aren't required to be like all the defense for a team anymore. And I think that actually has got to be super uplifting for some of these guys, like Dorian Finney-Smith, looking across and seeing other like elite defenders around him, right, which he's just not had in Dallas before. Like, that's got to be amazing, right? Like, amazing for him. But 2, if you are an offensive engine kind of guy, yeah, you can really look at this team and be like, man, not only will I have to not play a ton of defense, like I might just be the only scoring they need to like kind of get them over the hump. Championship level, probably not. Like, I don't think the addition of any of the 3 guys labeled here would put them over the top into that championship level team, mostly because you just need one of like 6 guys in the NBA to be on that team. And those guys aren't available. That's like Giannis, Jokic, KD, LeBron. Who am I missing? Maybe Embiid. The list is like really, really small for that group that can do it. But
I love Dame though. Looking at the list, I'm like, oh boy, Dame surrounded with
So
this type of defensive unit.
Yeah, if you were running like high pick and roll with Dame and then like just letting him like just take his 30 shots a game and like you made it up in the defensive end, it's like sort of in some ways what they were trying to create there, right? With like signing on like long fours and kind of like try to like just make a defense around him, which they're never able to do. Yeah, like that. This is totally where you want to be. And so they still kind of have a lot of money on the books. I mean, still the Simmons contract is always the disaster here, frankly. Like if he's going to get paid $36 million to play 16 minutes a game, it's going to be hard you'll never clear enough space to get these guys. And I think what we will end up seeing is there's such a redundancy in assets here that they're going to have to package guys together at some point to try to like move up or whatever, like, or try to like 3-team trade their way into like some superstars, because they just don't need this many 3-and-D guys, honestly. But yes, I agree with you that like I think this is going to be the thesis going forward. And I think they're going to hope on some level that Bridges becomes like 3/4 of one of these guys. That Bridges becomes a 20 shot a game guy. And those 20 shots are actually shots you want.
And I'll go big picture just for a second here, because this is what I started to think about after all the trades and everything. So you have these assets, and I think of it two ways. One, exactly what you had done the first time around, building up and making yourself attractive. You can, in free agency, attract someone, but you also have the assets to maybe go and make the big splash trade for that superstar if you wanted to. But the other thing I did think about was like, now going into drafts, you can sit there and say, like, the entire Kevin Durant, Kyrie era, it was kind of afterthoughts, right? Most draft classes, you're thinking, how do we trade out of the first round pick we have? And let's, kick the can down the road, trade it for players, etc. But now I think about how, with all the capital, in the next couple of seasons, they can also look at the draft and say, how do we move from 20th to 14th? How do we move up and maybe target specific guys that complement the refined roster they're going to have here? So I do think their offseason is going to be interesting, and guys like Royce are probably on the move. We know Seth won't be back, right? Like, so you'll thin it out, get more capital, and then be able to attack even the draft in a different way. And again, usually it's the top 2 or 3 guys that are superstars, but you can impact your roster. Like, you can approach the offseason differently while you have Ben Simmons money on the books, which like is at least going to be there through next trade deadline at a minimum.
A couple more up here before we break out on a Saturday night. I think they're building around Bridges for sure. And that might be it. I think like that is, and not to say they won't
watch Claxton over the back half of this season, right?
And
just to feel like fully committed to it now that you don't have pure superstars on the roster.
Yeah, look, you have Bridges on the books at like if he takes any ascension here on the offensive end, this will be one of the best contracts in basketball. Like he's basically $25 million. The last year of his contract is $25 million in 25-26. And if the rumors are true, like the Grizzlies offered 4 first-round picks, I'm sure there was like heavy protections on that. Like people kind of saw it. They're like, this guy could be more than he was in Phoenix. We were starting to see it a little bit without Booker there. It's been an ascension in his game over the years where he has been just creating more shots for himself. One thing you really like about him, about getting better, is he has like a super long wingspan and a very high release. So like this is a guy that can get into the mid range with this kind of game, because that like he's got 7'1" wingspan. That is like one of the reasons KD could kind of live in the mid range, right? He's like unblockable, right? Like at some point you're able to rise and fire above most other defenders. I think we're seeing that part of Bridges' game. And if he continues to get better, like he's a clear building block. Claxton, just on the contract, is like a clear building block. I don't think anyone else is like a clear guy. I think they're all nice players. I don't think anyone has like super high upside. I think those two, even Claxton's upside is not even amazing. I think we're probably pretty much seeing the peak here, like, or close to it.
I'll push back on that.
I know. I think you probably agree to that. Okay, let me put it this way. He's not going to be like, okay, so like, your best world is like Bridges becomes like Paul George, right? Or something like that, right? I think like you could talk yourself into a world where that like isn't a crazy thing to say. I don't think you can talk yourself into a world where like Claxton is like, who's the center equivalent? I don't even want to say Embiid or Jokic. I just don't think like, I think you can talk yourself into, okay, we'll do it this one way because I'm thinking about this on the fly. I think at some point you could say to yourself, oh man, Mikal Bridges is a top 20 player, right? Like I think there's a world where he's so good on defense and good enough on offense because he's allowed to just kind of cook a little bit, where he could end up in that range. I don't think Claxton can end up in that range. That's all. It's not a knock on him. It's just
by the way, I think a good way to frame it would be if Mikal Bridges can be, if you can dream him being a top 20 guy, the best version, we said this about the superstar team too, right? But like Nic Claxton being your third best player, depending on who your number 2 is, that can work. That can be great, right? But it depends on who the number 2 ends up being and whether or not the Nets feel like they can get there with a Cam Thomas, which I don't think necessarily is going to work out. I'm glad. You can pull up the green one here because he asked this while I was watching the show. You threw this out, Dwayne, during the show, so I'm glad you got back around to it.
Said this on before the game. They could not beat any of these teams in a series. They would probably be lucky to take a game, honestly, but they will be so annoying that it will be so annoying to try to have to get through them that I don't think teams would like love to do it because it's just defensively, it's just going to be so hard. Like those teams, they will not be able to score against these teams. Like they'll have such a struggle scoring, just because these teams probably have a little bit easier time against the Bucks than the Celtics. But teams that are super wing heavy, like the Celtics, will have, without like great dynamic play at the guards, like in terms of like super great on ball creation and stuff. Like these guys will give Tatum and Jalen like absolute and total fits. They'll lose, right? Like maybe they sneak a game out because they just like bomb 42% from 3 for a game or something, but they won't be able to do it, and it'll be so annoying. Bucks, they have multiple guys they can throw at Giannis in this group now. Like that is a good thing. Like they can throw DFS at Giannis. They could probably throw Claxton at Giannis at times. They could even probably Cam Johnson could try to speed bump him for a little bit. Like they're set up really well defensively to face these teams. Again, reminder, every team wants like every guy in this team because you need these super lengthy defensive oriented wings to win championships. They just can't be your second best player. Like that's where the offense will end up being a problem. So I think super annoying would never be a threat to win a series.
Do you my last thing was in the post game, Bridges mentioned, like he said, he's like still being like, hey, well, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, so you still have guys, learning the playbook. So in that regard, a game like
sorry
this
to interrupt. I'm just gonna interrupt you real quick. They just played their first game together.
Right.
And they just took Philly to a buzzer beater.
Right.
And they didn't even like totally shoot the lights out of the place. Like the Nets shot 33% from 3. Now, Philly shot 26% from 3. I would say a lot of that was defense on the Nets part, right? They made some of these things really hard. This team had never played a minute together. This Sixers team is like the fully formed, realized version of this team. They held them to 101 points and were a millisecond away from going to overtime against them if the Dinwiddie shot dropped. This is like an amazing effort. Like the team had never stepped on the court together, like at all, right? And all of a sudden, these guys played massive minutes with each other and were totally competent. I don't know. It's like super encouraging.
And by the way, like that's kind of why also from a rotation standpoint, like, Bridges and Johnson, DFS and Dinwiddie, like you do have 2 tandems that have played together. So you can, try to save yourself some level of the continuity piece on the fly. Did you mention, this is completely off topic and you wrap this thing up whenever you want. Did you make any note on about what you heard about the Nets at the trade deadline when it came to Bridges?
Did I say it? Didn't I just say it about the Memphis Grizzlies offering 4 first-round picks?
Yeah. Did you say that on the podcast? I was just curious what
I thought. Yeah, I definitely said it. I thought I actually said it when you came on. Yeah, no,
I was just curious, like what your takeaway was. When
So I'll never evaluate those reports unless I know what the protections are. So like this is such a sliding scale on this. So 2 things to think about this, right? 1, 4 first-round picks from Memphis. Forget even if there was no protections on it, but 4 first-round picks from Memphis are much different than 4 first-round picks from like the Hornets. Okay.
Right.
Because the Hornets are going to suck for the next 10 years. And so all those picks are going to be great. Memphis, there's like no world where they're going to be bad, like for 4 consecutive years or 5 consecutive years. Ja's too young. They're young across the board. Those picks are going to be bad. They could have major injuries and those picks won't be good. Right. So right from there, I know first round picks, everyone just wants to hear first round picks, just lose their minds. Like 1, not all first round picks are created equally, clearly. 2, the first round picks, you have no idea what protections they're putting on them. Right. So they can always just say first round pick. no one's reporting like, hey, this one has a top 12 protection. This one has a top 8 protection. Like all these things, like there's a world where those picks are like, yeah, it's 4 first-round picks. They're going to be 23 and beyond.
Right, or 20 to 30
exactly.
first-round picks. Yeah.
And so my firm belief on that is that I just hate when people report that because it just doesn't have all the information, and it's like kind of geared to like gaslight a fan base into thinking that like they just turned down this massive package when there's so many worlds where you would get to the end of those 4 picks and we're like, we didn't get anything for that. Right. Like, and that's why.
And my big takeaway too was, that looked like all indications was like a willingness to overpay Memphis was to get Bridges, but even call it 3.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, like, right. And that's what I mean. But like, let's call it 3 even. That's the value of Mikal Bridges, right? 3 first-round picks. It really would have brought me back to was just the trade and saying, so in addition to 4 first-round picks, you also got, a guy that it represents 3 first-round picks. It's a player you should want to keep, but like that equates just when we talk about, because watching everyone go, look at the Rudy Gobert trade, which we all said, which you and I at least at the time was like, yeah, this thing is not on a scale of anything because it means that every player is worth 40 first-round picks based on the way that they go about it. So I was just curious because I didn't get to hear you.
And that trade even threw off the whole market because like other GMs are going to be like, hey, it's not our bad that these guys were so dumb to pay this many picks. Like we're just not doing that again. So like that, I know everyone thought that, and me included probably too, thought that was going to reset this like trade market. And already you're seeing that getting clawed back in some of these deals because of just like, that was just such a sick overpay that people aren't going to like, no one's going to reset the market based on the Rudy Gobert thing because that was just wrong. Just completely wrong to begin with.
This was my last little note. I just saw a few people saying this and I watched the post game and stuff. And they were talking about like, should have been more Cam. What is he doing here? Why isn't Jock getting away from this stuff? I'm giving so much latitude for the coaching staff, for all the players as well. There's so much stuff to figure out. And I know there's a very one-to-one about like, hey, whoever your better scorers are, get them into the lineups. I'm not going to pass too much judgment on rotations for probably the first 4 or 5 games. And then you'll start to see it hopefully refine and you'll see them learning a little bit. But I also wondered, like, already throwing that out there where I'm like, hey, we're 2 games in, just got these 2, you know what I mean? Like there's a learning curve here for everybody.
I also wondered if there was like a little punishment maybe going on with Cam here. If you saw the post game, he said something like pretty unfortunate, like in the post game after last game, got fined by the NBA, I think $40,000. I was wondering too if there was like maybe a little implied punishment here on that, just because they were saying like, hey, you're going to sit out, like you're not going to play as many minutes or something like that. That's just me making that up. I don't know, but like there was context around the last game where he made some unfortunate comments that got him fined by the NBA.
Did a nice job with the apology though too. I will say like it felt very.
There's no
quick, it was immediate and it felt totally. Just felt like, hey, like whoop, my bad, shouldn't have said it.
Screwed up.
Didn't mean to. Yeah,
like, totally screwed up. Like shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
He got hit him in the pocketbook. He apologized right away. Not okaying it, but like what at that point, I'm not sure what else the expectation is. Okay, I think we're gonna break out of here. I see we still got a lot of people in here, but I think we will wrap this up for the night after Adam comes in for the late Mariano Rivera the close situation. Really appreciate everyone that jumped in to YouTube here, trying to get up to 5,000. Let me just see where we are real quick. Let's see how close we are. We are okay. We're still about 50 away. Got to do. If you're in the chat right now,
Blood Fox, it could be you.
Go hit subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube. Need to get that up to 5,000, and that is where we're going to go. Look, New World Nets, fun team to watch. Super excited for the rest of the season. I think it's a totally different brand of basketball that we saw. We are going to be right here every step of the way. Make sure you are back with us tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. On Monday, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.